Welcome to Vintage Underground and another episode. Today we're inside, a little bit different than what we normally do. Not outside doing a driving experience, not in the shop doing profiles of particular builds, but we're going to do a profile of a particular car, a very interesting car. With us today is Alex Hoglund of the Hoglund collection. Alex has a large collection of specifically British and Italian cars. Today we're going to go over specifically the AC Ace. This is a fully restored car, part of Alex's collection. A very nice example to look at from this perspective and talk about. And I'll have Alex explain a little bit about what this car is.
So this is a 1958 AC Ace. This car originally had the earlier AC motor, the Weller engine, but is currently fitted with a Bristol engine that they also came with in the period. It's a fairly original car, right-hand drive, UK market car, that although they did sell them here in the States, most of the early cars tended to stay overseas. And this is a pretty good example of what one originally looked like and drove like.
So one of these cars, you know, unlike like the MGTC, where right after the war they were made and almost exclusively were sent to the States, almost all of them. Most of these didn't go to the States.
It was mixed. I mean, some did come here, but it was a popular car in the UK as well. They're pretty expensive for the time, just because of the way that they're built, but they're a very good lightweight race car. They were never built in huge numbers, so it's really sort of hard to compare exactly where they all ended up, but a fair number of them did stay in the UK.
Do you know what rough production of the Ace was?
Off the top of my head, we're dealing with, I think, less than 2,000 units.
Yeah. All right, so let's address the elephant in the room, and that is, this thing looks like a Cobra. I'm gonna have Alex tell you why it's not.
So AC did build the original bodies of the Cobra that Carroll Shelby put the Ford V8 in. It is really the same foundation as what the Cobra is built on. But the Cobra came about due to a chain of events in which they're designing different engines or putting different engines in these cars. The original engine was what's called the AC Weller engine, designed by the Weller brothers in 1919. It was a very advanced engine for 1919.
Now were they the ones that actually started AC?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. So it was an internally developed engine. It was really advanced. It had an aluminum block, wet sleeve liners for the cylinders, cast iron head, but very lightweight, high output, overhead valve, overhead cam. So a really advanced engine for 1919.
Pretty exotic for what ultimately became production, was just cast iron pushrod motors. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at what Americans were doing at the same time, and we really were all flatheads at the time.
Yeah.
Nothing was as advanced as this.
Low cost instead of finesse, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah, originally it put out about 40 horsepower. Over the course of production, they got it up to a bit over 100. But frankly, by the time that they're putting it in the AC, post-World War II, it was a pretty primitive engine, about 30 years old.
And that's true of a situation that a lot of those brands had because of World War II up until about, I think all development and production stopped early 39, I think.
Yeah.
And so nothing was developed. All those factories were converted for making war machinery, and so no development was done, no production was done. So at the end of the war, they just picked up what they had before.
Yep.
And so those designs were dated already. In this case, that engine was dated before the war. It probably was coming to the end of its life, and they just picked it up and ran with it again. And so, what, 53?
Yeah, 53 was when the Ace came out.
Okay.
They were still building their pre-war 2-liter car with that same motor before this came out, but at that point it was a very dated design, very much a pre-war design.
They were looking for an engine for a design.
They're looking for an engine for design.
That's just what they had.
They came up with the design as a way of trying to update their line into the more modern style of cars, more like the Ferrari Barchettas and things that you're starting to see out of Italy. Something that didn't look like an early swooped fendered pre-war style car.
Yeah, and this certainly this shape, but kind of characterized the 50s and the differentiation of the pre-war stuff.
Yeah.
It didn't have independent fenders. It looks like a modern car.
Yeah.
So engine was kind of core problem really from the beginning.
Yeah.
But there was another option.
So what they did initially, AC didn't really have the money, time, or energy, being a small company, small manufacturer, to produce a new engine design. So they kept actually building the original AC engine. And this car, in fact, originally had the original Weller AC motor in it when
Even
it was
as a
new.
1958.
Even as a 1958. So they produced that engine until 1963 was when it finally just flat out was done. So the other option that they had in the 50s, however, they did have an optional engine, which is interestingly also war-related, a BMW-derived Bristol engine. It's basically the engine out of a pre-war BMW 328, a 2-liter cross-push rod, another very advanced engine design for the time. And Bristol was an airplane manufacturer that went into building cars. And they were building this engine for their cars, which were intended to carry 5 people in comfort and luxury on this small 2-liter motor.
Well, so they just sourced the motor. They were just looking for an alternative. So yet another pre-war design, but it must have been more efficient. It got more out of it.
Definitely more efficient. Later design. You have an engine from 1919 replaced by an engine from about 1935.
Yeah. Okay.
So definitely an improvement as they went forward. Still not necessarily as ideal as what they could do, but it was a good solution. And
so these engine problems, were all kind of ultimately culminated in Shelby bringing over an American V8 or bringing those two together.
Yeah. So where that came from is Bristol stopped building the engines around 1961, 1962, and they actually started putting Chrysler V8s in all of their cars that they were building.
This whole concept of the American V8 in these cars was actually started by AC, not Shelby.
It really is more Shelby, I think, that I would credit with it. Yeah. But there are a few cars that they started actually sourcing other American V8s for. V8s really were never that popular in Europe, largely because they were expensive to run. Gas was very expensive and rare as a commodity. It was a hard thing to really build a V8 car and actually take it out and drive it, especially the big American huge displacement V8s that we had over here.
So it was the fact that this car ended up being what ultimately became the Cobra was really kind of a natural progression of needing an engine. It's just the difference with the Cobra is the power that all of a sudden they had on their hands forced the car to evolve.
Absolutely.
Into something else.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about the car itself and the design. Now this is a Tejero. Is that how you say that?
That's how I'd pronounce it. Yes, John Tejero.
So he's the guy in all the Cobra world because he did this. But I don't know. He designed this. He didn't design the extensions on the Cobras, the flares. Or
I don't know what role he had in the redesign of the body to fit the later Cobra, but he did the initial design of the car. There were some changes done. A lot of the flares you see on the Cobras actually came in not necessarily with this body design, but with the big block engines. They needed to fit bigger tires underneath because, frankly, with the big block Ford engine in there, there's just no way that you
dramatically
could fit
changed
a viable wheel under here.
The front suspension, everything. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the development of this car and how it's put together and why it was such a natural fit into the 60s with ultimately what became the Cobra. And one is it's lightweight.
Very light.
And if you've seen one of these cars skinned with the aluminum off of it, there's not much there. It's the main frame pieces that are, I think, 3-inch tube. And then everything's an extension off of that, including the suspension and then all the supports for the bodywork, right?
Yeah, and most of the bodywork is made out of essentially a chromoly style tube, very thin wall, very light tube that they basically would shape and then wrap a English wheeled aluminum skin around. So there really is very little weight and very little structure to the car itself, just enough to support it.
It's not a birdcage design, and it does have 2 main frame structures, but that's kind of it. The only thing that tie those together are the front and rear suspension. Other than that, it's just support structure for aluminum, just to create the shape. There's no structural integrity to it.
It's a lot like the early Zagato cars in Italian cars. You tend to see that same type of design. A very light framework just supporting a skin, an elegant shaped skin like this, but just a very light skin. So you see this design in Italy and the UK, and that's kind of about it that I know of. it was pretty much focused primarily on these lightweight sports cars.
Well, they're lightweight, but I think probably the more driving factor is that they were inexpensive to build this way. It's just
time consuming, a lot of handwork, but otherwise, yes.
But no giant production tools required.
Exactly. So for small production cars like this, it worked really well.
It worked well. So this Tejero design, and he's famous for what ultimately became the Cobra. But the original design is really clean and simple. With the Cobra came flares and other things. But if you study this original design, it's really quite clean and pure. Some of that was kind of lost in translation as the car moved on to the 60s and whatnot, but a very 1950s classic design. There were a lot of the Ferraris and Maseratis and a lot of cars in this era were kind of took this shape.
Absolutely.
So these cars, when they ultimately came over to the States as the Cobra, that's how most Americans know them. A lot of people don't realize there's a hardtop version of this.
Yeah, the AC Asica. So it's basically the same car. It has a hatchback, but full roof, full doors.
Same. It looks the
Very
same
similar.
though. The
Pretty
nose
similar.
is the same and everything, right?
Yeah. A few differences in construction, but very close. So it's the same lightweight tube frame, same very light aluminum skin over the top of it in a lot of ways.
Same mechanicals, same
Absolutely.
suspension, all those kinds of things. So a hardtop version that a lot of people didn't know exist. Now, when Shelby brought it over and presented it to America as the Cobra with the V8 in it, they weren't interested in the hardtop.
Pretty much.
And so it probably died there, I guess.
I believe so.
So a little bit about the design build on these, and the suspension is interesting. The front is a transverse leaf, independent front suspension. Transverse leaf's not the best solution there, but it's a pretty good one as opposed to like a straight axle.
It's efficient and lightweight. It was used on a lot of sports cars in this era.
Yeah, I mean there was certainly better ways to do it. It was a heck of a lot better than a straight axle. The rear end is fully independent as well.
Yes.
So one, and this it kind of back to the original form. These cars are lightweight, independently sprung on all four corners, which should add up to a pretty good handling car. With the power available, the 2-liter power available to it, I think it's probably a reasonably neutral car.
Absolutely. It handles actually quite well, just as with the engine that's in it right now.
Because I know that later in Cobra life, as they all of a sudden went from what's the output of this motor with the Bristol motor?
The Bristol motor in this is about 135 horsepower.
So from there up to 200, 300, 400, or 500 horsepower dramatically changes a car. And as I understand, in those later forms of all that horsepower, they were quite ill handling. We talk about that a lot. About a lot of your cars are what I'll call neutral. Not overpowered. Everything kind of is in balance.
It's a really good package overall, and it really does improve the driving experience of the car. If you talk to a lot of people who own the modern 427 kit cars or even own an original Cobra, they'll frequently be willing to admit that the car will outdrive them. It's a little bit scary, honestly, how much power that they're getting out of these things.
Yeah, interesting. I love that concept about these cars that, when they were made, they often were in balance. Let's just say that. The power matched the brakes, matched the suspension, and all that really worked well. And that's true of any car. You take any one of those and get them out of parameter, and you can create kind of a monster.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
very neutral car.
And it really has to be everything, not just the engine, not just the traction. It has to be the brakes. It has to be the gearbox and the gearing. Really, it has to be kind of everything about the car to really bring it into a good balance.
So this original design, whatever the reputations were of the Cobra or whatever, these original cars, AC Aces, were very neutral, well handling, nice driving cars. So that's kind of what we have. This is one of the quintessential British cars, and there's a few I'll put in that category. The MGTC, the
Austin Healey 100s and 3000s.
TR3,
the TR3,
yeah,
Jaguar XK120s.
right. And it was cars out of that originated, they either were or originated out of the 50s that really just kind of defined British motoring at that time. And this is certainly one of them. This was a modern looking, well, I guess at the time it would have been considered kind of exotic.
Absolutely.
Car, and a really nicely balanced, well-represented car. That's all we've got today. Thanks for watching. If you like what you see, please like and subscribe. Next, we're going to dig out Alex's NSU Spider, the first rotary-engined car.